Hi everybody and welcome to the Ben Raemers Foundation SMiLE Q&A film breakdown. I just want to say a humongous thank you to you guys for doing this. It means absolutely masses, and Chris for the bravery that you've shown. I know it's not easy. It's actually super hard. But seeing the difference, that these SMiLE films have made, you're going to be making such a humongous difference. So a massive thank you to you. Like most people probably know, I'm Lucy Raemers, and I helped start the foundation alongside 3 other amazing trustees. So yeah, I'm just going to be jumping on tonight to work alongside these 3 amazing humans to just have an open discussion about Chris's amazing film and some questions that we've had from our Instagram page. And just normally we do these things live, but they're a bit more tricky now. So yeah, I'm gonna pass over to Andy, and then everyone can introduce your amazing selves.
So I thank you very much. I'm kind of hosting this evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I have spent 20 years in the emergency services, most of that time dangling under rescue helicopters, spent some time out in Afghanistan as well as a paramedic with the Air Force. And a couple of years ago with a pivot, I now focus on saving lives through mental health rather than physical health. So it's a pleasure to be here tonight. Can I pass back? Lucy, you've introduced yourself. Leilah, can we hear from you?
Yeah, hi. So I'm Leilah. I currently work as a mental health advisor for Centrepoint UK, which is a charity that works with youth homelessness. So I work with young people aged 16 to 24 and kind of advocate for them for their mental health and work with them through that. I'm also training to be an integrative child psychotherapist. I find that word really hard to say, but it means that I'm training and specialising in working with trauma and mental health using different modalities like art and kind of psychodynamic theories, but different ways of kind of interacting with the children and their mental health and their trauma and dealing with it.
It's amazing.
Brilliant.
So
thank you. Super. And Chris, we come to you last with this brilliant film. We're really looking forward to seeing. Tell us a bit more about yourself for those that don't know you already, please.
Well, yeah, I kind of introduced myself in the film. My name is Chris Jones. I'm a professional skateboarder for Nike and Isle. I've been skateboarding for 20 years now. I live in London. I've lived here for approximately 8 years now, I believe. And yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot more I could say about myself, but I don't want to drag it on, so I'll keep it sweet.
Cool.
Chris, I really love the film, honestly. My friend, I think it's fantastic. Normalising the conversation around mental health is just brilliant, and I think you've done this epically, really, with the film, which is brilliantly made as well. Is there anything you feel you want to add just to kick us off before we look at some of the questions that we've had sent in on Insta?
It's interesting watching it back over. I've only seen it once. I don't know about you 3, but I personally find it quite hard listening to myself talking. So it's like I kind of just watched it when Rob sent it to me, like the rough cut, and I was like, oh cool, yes, like it's good, crack on. So it's kind of I did have to turn the volume down a little bit, but I managed to sit through it, and yeah, it was kind of interesting listening back over it. I think there's things in there. It's one of those when you're talking about this stuff, it's always quite like it's quite difficult. Like it's quite difficult talking openly about things that maybe you've like suffered and struggled with. So kind of I guess like doing it in like kind of like constructive way, which like has a narrative that makes sense to someone else. It's kind of I think like the film itself is done really well. It's like edited and patched together, so there is this kind of story that runs through it. And it's, yeah, there's like obviously things as well that you like, I feel you'd kind of, it's, I suppose it's there's things you kind of, I would probably word slightly differently, but overall I think like there's, yeah, it was kind of, it was interesting listening back over it, to be honest.
It was, yeah, I thought it was amazing. And I think the bit at the end, Chris, where it's, you know, you don't have to like have there shouldn't be something behind having a right, or there's got to be something for you feeling bad. I think that's so important, because I think I've spoken to people in the past that have said that they're struggling and they're like, but I've got nothing to you know, feel like I'm struggling about because my life's great. And it's like, don't feel like you have to be in crisis mode or something. There has to be a reason, like you say, behind it. I think that was such an important message and so powerful.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things where a lot of it is, I think, like with me personally, anyway, when it came to my mental health, there was this like sense of shame, like you kind of don't really, your issues aren't like as bad as maybe you may. There's a lot of like comparisons being made. You kind of like, oh, my situation's actually quite blessed in comparison to maybe someone else who has gone through something a bit more traumatic. But at the same time, like I say in the film, I suppose it's like it is relative, and it doesn't underestimate, it doesn't make your struggles and your issues any less valued. And you know, I think a part of that is acknowledging it and working with it, and kind of like actually kind of not neglecting it, because I think a lot of people tend to neglect these things that they're struggling with because they don't feel like somehow allowed to feel that way, so they hide it. And I think
and then it becomes sort of more seeped in shame, I think, and that's where those feelings really get overwhelming and really big, and then they do get to that point, like you were saying, where they maybe reach a crisis point. But actually having that insight to kind of acknowledge that you're feeling a certain way, and that's okay, and it is much more normal and more common than we kind of maybe think in our head as well. You know, like you said, it's what happens to people who've been through this deep trauma, or this has happened to them. But actually, I think pretty much everyone I know has had, myself included, had versions of what you've described in that film, you know, of those feelings, anxiety, social anxiety, that comparison. You know, it's part of the human condition in a way, you know, and that's why it's so beautiful to see someone open up like that, because it really, you know, why is it so stigmatized? Because it is, you know, it's how I feel we all feel at some point in our lives, and it isn't spoken about as openly as maybe it should be or would like it to be. But yeah, you did it in a really beautiful way, and I like what you said about it had a narrative, you know, and you touched on some really great things about, you know, different types of therapy like CBT and humanistic, and you know, all of those kind of the journey that we go on. Because I sometimes think as well that those feelings that we feel, anxiety, can sometimes, when we reflect back on them, be a way of actually getting to know ourselves better. Like we also always sort of put them as a really negative thing, but if you manage to work through them and kind of go on that journey like you described in that film, it can be a way to get to know yourself better.
Definitely.
Yeah, and so some of those, I think what's coming across to me, Chris, is you're saying, yeah, the film's been beautifully put together as a narrative to help tell your story, but with hindsight, we can maybe have those reflections, and at the stage you're at in your journey. But I know for me, in the journey I've been on with depression and burnout, at certain key times, you haven't got the big picture of where you are in this journey. You're just so wrapped up in this downward spiral. It's only when you've moved through that and you've got some hindsight and you can reflect back, actually, those were a few blips in the road. And maybe, although there were really dark days and they really challenged me, maybe those are the things now that define me and make me stronger. And, you know, it can be a learning journey for a lot of us about ourselves, Leilah, as you've said, and about maybe how to deal with some of the situations we've found ourselves in, and normalizing the conversation and talking to our mates. That seemed to be positive for you, Chris. And I'm wondering, now that you've started talking about it, has it become easier? Is it more acceptable with your peers and your mates in the skating community than what you thought?
Yeah, definitely. I think over the recent years, it's definitely changed a lot. I think like talking about mental health, I feel like when I was younger, it wasn't really discussed in that way. And I suppose that's definitely kind of linked in with like kind of me getting to a stage where like I burnt out, and I kind of had that moment, that crisis moment where things just overflowed and it became very overwhelming. It was like not having the right things there to like kind of manage these negative thoughts or kind of feelings and difficult situations, like life situations that were happening, and then just kind of being like, oh no, you're fine, neglecting it. And then kind of getting to a point when I had to do something about it. But yeah, I definitely feel over the last like few years, especially as well since Ben's passing, since, you know, Ben took his own life, I think that for a lot of people was a very big like wake up call. Like we need to talk. It's like, it's also like you shouldn't feel shame for, you know, having like feeling bad. Like those feelings are like just as valid as feeling good. I think there's like a lot of stigma around that kind of in our society, like, oh no, you don't have those bad feelings. They're not as valued as good ones. But I think it's just being honest, and definitely for me personally, like you know, I still kind of struggle like with anxiety. I still get it. Like it comes on, but I feel now I'm not as like ashamed to like mention it and talk about it. And it's just kind of it's kind of this thing when like you said as well, there's like, well, every person has like suffering in their life. It's a part of like the human life. Like we have moments of joy and we have moments of suffering. It like is what makes you as a person. And like that journey, yeah, it's kind of has this narrative, but it maybe you can tell that narrative afterwards, like I had this and then I had this moment which was really hard, but I came out of it. But in the moment, yeah, it doesn't feel like there's this structure and you're on this journey. You're like, the journey feels so disorientating and so confusing. You're like, where is like my way out of here? Like, where's the thing, you know? But it's afterwards you can be like, oh, that actually. So I think there's that as well. I think when it comes to suffering, there's like a lot you can learn from those moments about yourself and about, you know, the people you're surrounded with as well. It can really be a thing if approached in the right way. And I think there's like always a sense of like not accepting it, like, oh, I'm feeling a bit shit, like, no, I shouldn't feel shit, like, why do I feel? It's like the moment you can kind of accept it more, you can kind of learn from it and take away from it, and for the next times when you come across certain issues again, you can kind of apply those methods and those kinds of ways of coping with it.
Like I feel similar with like with how I've been grieving over Ben, like what you say, it's like not suppressing those feelings, it's acknowledging them and trying to get some kind of understanding towards them and, you know, where they're taking you. And I found like that, you know, very similar. I was kind of suppressing a lot, but actually, you know, when I've, you know, dealt with it and deal with it, and then you do go, you know, grow from these things and go on a different journey. So I guess it's, you know, yeah, kind of similar. Any kind of feeling I think you have, you know, any hurt or something that's, like I say, not just good feelings, ones that are causing you, you know, some discomfort, hurt, finding it really tough. I think it's just understanding them so that when they do come back, you know how to take them on and carry on growing.
I think, could I pull a few things together there? Leilah said, you know, having these feelings, and that's okay. And that's a thing that I suggest to people to pop on to the end of their sentence. If they're feeling unsure about it, they're feeling anxious, depressed about it, just tag that on to the end of their sentence. I'm feeling, however, and that's okay. You know, often the stigma that we're feeling, the biggest stigma that we have is around that shame. It's self-stigma. It's not the stigma out there. And an early intervention when it comes to mental health is it provides a better outcome, just the same as physical health.
Yeah.
And often we try to fix ourselves. So many of us, particularly if we are high performers and successful, we try and fix ourselves, and we don't want to admit that there's a little chink in the armor. But accepting a little help from someone else, talking about it, is proven to work so well. Do you find that what I find is the voice in my own head is probably the most critical one I have? I say things to myself that I wouldn't dream of saying to anyone else.
Yeah.
So having a conversation with someone, you can often get some great vibes back, some great positive stuff back, support that can really help you in those moments, those darker moments, those difficult moments of your life. But all this is so normal. You're not alone. It's so common. So some of the questions we had coming in from Insta were focused around social anxiety in particular. So Chris, would you kick us off? Maybe do you have some top tips, things that have really helped you or that you'd advise or encourage other people to try if they're feeling this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, some of the things I did at the beginning when I started to experience social anxiety, it's like I'm quite a social person, like at the most of the time, and I remember that being one of the new things after having that crisis moment, which I talked about in the film. I remember afterwards having a lot of social anxiety, and my behaviors to like respond to those anxieties was like really unhealthy. Like I'd usually kind of avoid situations or kind of like have safety mechanisms to kind of like pull out of situations if I couldn't handle it. So I wouldn't really deal or sit with the kind of difficult emotions that I was experiencing, but also all it did was it just kind of built the fear of these situations more. It kind of added to the anxiety. I'd get like a short-term release if like, you know, my friends were like, oh, we're like, there's a party tonight, do you want to come? I'd be like, oh no, I'd be like anxious. I'd be like, oh, if I go, I'm gonna like make a fool. You know, negative automatic thoughts, and then I'd kind of avoid it, feel good for a bit, but then the next day be like, oh, I still feel anxious, and then only another situation would come about, and I'd avoid it, and it kind of builds this. For me anyway, it like built this fear up around the kind of that going to this like social event. So like I remember this was some of the stuff that for me personally CBT was really helpful, because at that point my behaviors were really being impacted by like my negative thoughts. And what it helped me to do was to really go through this process of like you know, like exposure to like desensitize to myself to these kinds of feelings. And also like, you know, you catastrophize your idea of how things are going to be are always a lot worse than the actual reality. I think like that's the whole thing. When you're in these like negative mind states, you're like you said, you're your own worst critic. So you're going to be like, you're going to go, it's going to be a disaster. You're going to embarrass yourself. But the actual reality of it, like, is quite different to that. Even if you are feeling really shit and you go to like a birthday, a dinner, you may feel really uncomfortable. But if you can like have like healthy coping mechanisms to manage and sit with that feeling, then it doesn't take long before you kind of, your body calms down. You kind of get out of this like fight, flight, freeze kind of mode where you're panicking, and you're actually like, oh, there is no danger actually. I'm like, here I was like experiencing, it's like not really the reality of like the situation. So I kind of found for me some of the things that allowed me to sit in that, because it's not easy when you're feeling incredibly anxious and you're in like a room full of people. You know, it's easy to be really quiet, not speak, or, you know, not have eye contact, or leave early, or just not go at all. So I kind of, for me personally, I found like things like breathing was like a kind of mindfulness was really helpful. like in those moments, you're obviously like, you know, becoming aware and having something else to focus on really kind of like took away, like it's not, you know, and also these things don't change overnight. This takes like quite a lot of effort and like a lot of time. And it's not easy. It's like really not comfortable when you're feeling that anxious to go and put yourself in this environment which you find difficult. But yeah, I found breathing really helpful. I found kind of like doing like some people don't really work well with like workbooks and stuff like that, but like writing down my expectations of what I thought would happen and then kind of journaling afterwards and being like, what did actually happen? And usually you have like your worst idea of what can happen, the best idea, and the outcome usually when you're not feeling good is somewhere in the middle. It's never the worst. It's very rare that like it goes that badly. And yeah, just like like these things are all quite helpful, I feel, for social anxiety. They were for me anyway.
Fantastic. And that's really common. The avoiding behavior, that's what a lot of us try to do. So taking those little baby steps, maybe having someone there, opening up to them and having someone there to support you is great. The breathing, I'll tell you, I read a brilliant book lately, and this young lady was saying what she does, she really focuses in on her senses. She'll have strong licorice she eats if she's feeling a bit anxious, strong licorice or really strong chewing gum. And just those senses, the tastes that she has, and focusing with your senses on what else is around you can be really good and just move you on from that anxiety and the worst fears that you're feeling. But the breathing is a top tip. I love the journaling. It really helped me with depression as well, and gratitude. And if you're not feeling confident enough to speak to other people, writing it down just for yourself, you don't have to do anything else with it, can be the next best step and really helpful offloading.
Yeah, I find...
No, I was just going to come to you, Leilah. I'm sure you've got something in this. Brilliant.
No, I was just going to say that social anxiety as well was something, again, that I feel like, you know, everyone experiences to a certain degree, and knowing what triggers your particular version of social anxiety. So for some people, it's like big groups or little groups more intimidating, but they might find one-on-one conversations more easier. So when you're actually in the social situation, finding the things that maybe within that can calm you down. So finding one other person to speak to who you might feel a little bit more comfortable with. Because social anxiety is that sort of intense fear that everyone's watching you and judging you. So kind of taking that attention off yourself for a bit. So asking questions to other people, you know, engaging in things that take you out of yourself. Like you said, Andy, with the, you know, getting back to your senses, it takes you out of this incessant kind of negative self-talk where everyone's watching me, I'm saying something stupid, what shall I say next, am I being funny, you know, that kind of constant stream of chatter, anything that kind of can distract you from that. And I find personally often that is focusing on someone else that you might find as a calming presence or is interesting, or just asking questions and trying to find some joy in that social situation. But things that you can do to also prepare. So I know it sounds a little bit maybe like hippy dippy, but kind of, you know, like visualizing and feeling, you know, imagining yourself in these social situations and talking to someone and feeling relaxed, and, you know, doing those breathing techniques or incorporating the relaxation things that you might learn or that might make you feel at ease. So I think one that I find is like a long inhale through like pursed lips. I go like, and then exhale like naturally through my nose. And that's kind of one, I think it's like a pranayama, which is like the yogic breathing, which really calms down your nervous system because you're also incorporating kind of a strong facial element. Anyway, it's just one that I find particularly helpful. If there's like different kind of breathing exercises and techniques that you can go away and kind of see what works for you as well. And then more generally, kind of like you said, Chris, the CBT deals with the core beliefs that are going on in your head that maybe trigger the social anxiety. So what are the feelings behind it, that you're not worthy or that you're being judged or you need to prove yourself to other people? And those are things that things like CBT can help you kind of address. The more like the self-talk, I actually, like you said, Andy, that voice in your head that's your own voice is often your worst critic. I found naming her to kind of remove herself from me quite helpful. So she's called Brenda, and that kind of helped me quite basic as well. You know, it's just Brenda's just being like a bit, I don't know, can I say bitch? But yeah. Brenda's just, you know, Brenda's on one, and she's doing that thing where she's telling me, oh, you're this, you're that, and I'm just like, oh, Brenda, come on. And you know, Brenda kind of makes her, yeah, like it sort of reduces her and her power over me a little bit, because it's just Brenda, and she's just having one of those days where she's like really attacking me, and it kind of separates that voice inside my head from me. I'm like, I'm Leilah, I'm not this terrible person, it's just Brenda sort of doing her Brenda thing, you know. And I've found that personally quite helpful.
That's brilliant. There's another technique that does basically that same thing.
Sorry to anyone called Brenda, it's, you know, it's not based on anyone I actually know.
but just acknowledging what's going on, recognizing that, acknowledging it, investigating it a little bit. So you've investigated it enough to know that Brenda's just having one of these days, but then the beauty is just non-identifying, just letting it go like a cloud passing in the sky. There's nothing we can do about that, but let it go. I can have Brenda in my head, but it's not going to define me. I'm still Leilah.
Exactly. And then you don't get into that sort of spiral that you can get into, like where you're thinking these horrible thoughts about yourself, and you can just sort of spiral into shame and negative, and then it feels quite, you know, like heavy and trapped. But if you identify that it's Brenda more early on, you can sort of, you don't go down the spiral, I find, quite as
absolutely.
Something you said as well, Leilah, about the core beliefs, I think that for me personally was something I really had to work on. There was like this core belief of having to be perfect, like going to a social event and being like the fun one or something, and this like kind of almost feeling like there's like conditions that you need to meet in order to like go to this situation. But then challenging that and like allowing for imperfection was something which was really, like, for me, quite transformative, like kind of not having to be perfect or like the best version of myself at every single given time. And there's moments where I can feel bad and still go and like be in a group and just be like, oh yeah, I'm feeling a bit shit and I'm not on great form, but
that's okay.
And like a lot of the time you kind of find, you'll be surprised as well, like when you kind of just accept it and just go with it, you find yourself snapping out of it a lot quicker as well, and just actually, Chris, like I call it Chris B and Chris A, and Chris B tends to like just go away after a while, and he's like, he kind of fucks off when he's like not getting his attention.
B for Brenda.
Excellent.
I was gonna say, isn't it Brenda?
Well,
when I think about with Ben, he definitely had social anxiety was something hugely affected him. And that's when his way of coping with it became through alcohol. So it's so important, you know, like we've all been saying, dealing with it, you know, and you know, trying to find strength, which is just sometimes just not easy. But that's where like things like, you know, your film, Chris, normalizing this and making it more open, and you know, getting people behind just reaching out, you know, getting support and saying, you know, I'm not okay. I think it's just so important.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, oh, sorry, Lucy, just that thing that it is often a feeling that I think a lot of people drink on or use drugs on, because that momentarily or temporarily feels like it avoids that feeling.
Masks it,
masks it, and maybe you become this version of yourself that, you know, you feel is like what you were saying, Chris, performative, or, you know, like fun, or whatever it is that you're putting that pressure on yourself to be in that social situation. But it is a mask, and it, you know, it's a short-term solution, and often it can make the problem worse, because, you know, alcohol's a depressive, you know, drugs, you have the whole aftermath of all of that. Which I've seen, you know, people use and have those after effects in massive ways, but it's definitely a coping mechanism that I think is so common.
Yeah,
It really is, and actually it's linked a lot more to men as well. The stats show that women will talk more to their friends, they will seek help more, they'll get a diagnosis, whereas men try to fix themselves, they abuse substances more, and they tend to bottle it up for a long time, and when it comes out, it tends to have a violent outcome. There is unequivocally a link between substance abuse, especially alcohol, and suicide. So one of the questions that I'd like to move on to now that we had through Insta was around addiction. So how would you approach a friend that's showing signs of addiction without offending them? Would anybody like to take that one?
I would love to I think this is something with Ben that I really regret not doing, because I saw him go down the route of addiction. You know, he was completely, it was, bless him, towards the end, alcohol was, you know, his crutch, and he was drinking from morning till the evening, which I really didn't have 100% realization to until the last time I saw him before we lost him. And I asked her, our mum suffers of addiction. She's had an alcohol problem for most of our lives, and it really, really upset Ben and affected him. And I saw, when I started noticing, like I say, signs, but I kind of didn't want to say anything. And then that very last time I saw him, I thought, Christ, there's something really, really wrong here. But I didn't want to put him in a corner and make him feel embarrassed about it, because I know it would make him feel horrendous because of how much he, you know, was upset about our mum going through it. And I thought, I'm going to really embarrass him if I say to him, Ben, I've noticed, you know, you've been drinking a bit more. But what I should have just done is actually taken myself. Yes, it would have been uncomfortable, but oh my God, it might be the first time that they will know, you know, themselves. I think someone that's got, you know, is drinking heavily, a lot of the time they do know that there is a problem there, but, you know, they're maybe just not ready to say out loud, I've got a problem. And sometimes it might just take having someone just to reach out and just say, and it's the way you say it. You don't have to go in there and be like, you're a bloody alcoholic. What the hell are you doing having to do you know what I mean? I think it is speaking to them like a human, and like what I wish I'd just done with Ben is just said, you know, Ben, I've noticed you drinking a bit more, and I'm just worried about you. Because no one can get angry with you talking from the heart, saying, I'm worried, because it's just love, isn't it? Yeah. I think, I think it's just the way, you know, just be completely mindful of that conversation. They may not turn around and go, well, actually, yeah, can you sign me up to AA? Got any numbers? It's going to probably be uncomfortable. It's going to be difficult, but Jesus Christ, one uncomfortable conversation is so worth it in the grand schemes of saving someone from addiction. So don't be afraid. I say, we'll speak to them just like a human being, and just saying I'm worried is, you know, no one can argue with that, can they?
Yeah,
I think that's brilliant, Luce. Yeah, fantastic. And being non-judgmental about what they come back with is fantastic. And if you're able to do that, that actually delivers empathy. It's proven by research, by Brené Brown, that kills that shame that someone was feeling. They may not open up to you the first time, but if you're making it okay to talk about this thing that they're maybe afraid to talk about, that is fantastic. Even they don't speak to you today, they'll know, I'll come back and open up to Luce when I'm ready, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in that sense, you know, if you're trying to broach that subject with someone, don't worry too much about saying the right thing or the perfect thing or finding the exact words. It's like Lucy said, if you're coming from a place of love and respect and concern and being non-judgmental, not, you know, putting someone into that shame bracket, that's what will come through. And they might not be ready to hear it, because that's, you know, the thing about addiction is that, you know, you might not be able to, you know, make them see, or they might not be ready to hear what you're telling them, but you can, I think, you know, sow a seed. There's someone there that they can talk to about it, and also, you know, have options. I've got friends in recovery, and you know, I've sowed the seed for other friends in recovery by, you know, letting them know that that network is out there and people have experienced those things and got help with them in different ways, you know, so people knowing that there are options and there are ways to do things and there are people there to support them, but not necessarily, you can't force someone to do those things, but you can kind of sow that seed and let them just know that it's there to get to when they're ready, because ultimately it will be when they reach that point themselves.
Yeah,
I think a key message is there's loads of help out there. This is really common. You're not alone. I'm here to support you. Let's look at some of the options, and we can see what might suit you, what you feel comfortable with choosing. So if someone engages, makes that choice, it's a much more likelihood that it will be successful for them. But it's an ongoing journey, as you've said, Chris. It is for me as well. We don't just get back to our former selves. It's an ongoing journey, but with more awareness, we can notice when Brenda's coming in a bit earlier on and stop her in her tracks a little bit. We'd say where I'm from, you can catch yourself on. You have more knowledge about yourself, and especially when you don't feel you have to cover it up. It's okay to be you. It's just normal life, isn't it? We all have mental health. There is no health without mental health. So a few more questions that we had coming in. We've covered some of these already, actually. We haven't specifically mentioned panic attacks. If anyone is having a panic attack, we've talked about the sense of smell and the breathing. Would anyone like to take that and just offer some top tips around that, if anyone out there?
Yeah, I think with panic attacks, I think someone asked about repeated panic attacks. So obviously with panic attacks, there's things you can do in the moment that we've already kind of mentioned, like regulating your breathing, having some education or like insight about what they are. Because I think when you first have a panic attack and you don't know it's a panic attack, you actually think you're dying, or you think it's something more serious. And, once you realize that they're panic attacks, you can maybe kind of know that they will be over and it's a panic attack. And that in itself can kind of, deregulate you, and the breathing can, regulate your nervous system. But I think if you're having repeated panic attacks, you should kind of seek help in the form of things like CBT. They can offer medication, because if you're having repeated panic attacks, I think it'd be more like a panic disorder. And then you should maybe explore, what the triggers are. Like, is it related to a trauma? Chris mentioned previous things about his dad, and, things that can have happened to you before that might be showing up in different ways and expressing themselves in the form of a panic attack. So there are things I think you can do in the moment. There's professional help you can seek to kind of address what's underlying the panic attacks. And maybe, again, it's all about understanding, are there certain triggers? Are you having them in certain situations, or are they just happening, whenever? Is there a pattern to them? Trying to understand and kind of monitor your own panic attacks, and then, approaching the different forms of help from all of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think encouraging professional help is really important, because it's an intricate subject. There's so much help out there, and finding what's right for you. The professional help, and starting with your GP is great. Or there's a self-referral link through the NHS, which we can drop in the chat, or in the afterwards. It goes out if you want, Luce. I can pass that to you.
That'd be great. Yeah, we can. And like I say, anybody. We've got next.
Brenda.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Sometimes, like, and not to sound too, I think I've said hippy dippy before. I'm obviously paranoid about seeming hippy dippy, but I am, so it's fine. But yeah, sometimes, I think we look at things like anxiety and panic, and it's just seen in this really negative light, because obviously they're really difficult things to experience, and they're really horrible when they don't feel good. But it is often a way of our body or our mind trying to tell us something, trying to send us a message. And that's where the kind of self-knowledge comes in. And like you said, Chris, like the human experience, we have joy, we have anxiety, we have depression, we have all these feelings. But often, you know, the more extreme anxiety and panic is your brain or your body or something is trying to send a message, or you haven't, you know, dealt with something, or, you know, there's something there that's trying to be expressed to you. So I think, you know, you can also change your perception about the way that you see your anxiety, not, you know, as a gift in a sense, but that is, you know, if you, like we said, manage to get out of the darkness and work through it, you can kind of look at it in that perspective, and it can be a really powerful thing in the, you know, the overall journey. We all know that in the moment it's horrible and uncomfortable and can be completely overwhelming, but I think for people to hear the other side of it and people coming through it, and that's why it's so important to share it, that it can, you know, it doesn't always have to be this extremely negative thing that can destroy us. It can be something which in the end makes us more powerful.
I think as well, I think having, you know, I think part of the problem with anxiety is it's that unknown and not understanding it, and it's a feeling that you know, it's not understanding it, is it? So I think if you can, you know, like I say, try and work through it, try and get some kind of understanding as to how it's making you feel and how to overcome that. That's kind of part, isn't it? Part of a big part of it, definitely.
Yeah, sharing it as well. I think I've made some of the best friendships when I've been really vulnerable and said all my sort of darkest shadow self of when I felt awful about myself, or I've shared what Brenda's saying with someone, and you know, those are where, you know, people can meet you in those feelings and kind of sit with you in distress and pain and grief and like horrible uncomfortable feelings. Sometimes people can meet you there, and that can be really beautiful as well.
You can, maybe it wasn't your intention, but you can help someone else an awful lot by sharing how you're feeling. It really does bring people close together, and friendships for life form. Leilah, you're absolutely right. So just to sort of pull everything together and round off, Liz, if we could come to you, we've had some questions around why do we think skaters do take their own lives by suicide? If you could say a little bit on that for us, and then just round off how people can help with the foundation, please.
Yeah, of course. I think, which is something Chris can probably touch on as well, obviously being a professional skateboarder, I think I always try to be very tactful in how I talk about this, because I think sometimes I don't want it to come across like ever I'm painting, you know, the skateboarding in a bad light, because it's essentially with Ben, it was because of him not having any routine and not having any structure is where that led him to kind of go off the rails, and skateboarding was his job, and that was, you know, partly it was, I think, being younger, he was very heavily influenced by watching skaters, and it's very much like a party lifestyle, and Ben was like, I want that, and then loved that aspect of it because it was so much fun, but then actually it was battering his mental health so badly, and then he, you know, ended up in his spare time not being on trips, drinking loads. So I think part of the problem, I think if you know, and to skateboard to some degree, you kind of got to have that bit of a personality. Whereas Chris, I don't even need to look at me and be like, you're about to insult me. You kind of got to have that personality where you kind of, do you know what I mean? Fun. I'm going to go with really, really fun. And I think with Ben, he was like a Tasmanian devil as a child, and so reckless. And unfortunately, what comes with that is not someone who is going to sit down and be like, do you know what? In between my skate trips, I'm going to put some money into stocks and shares, and I'm also going to do a degree at uni. It just doesn't work that way. You know, in your spare time, you've gone from your actual work being away was him having this crazy trip, and then he comes back, and then it's like, well, pub? Do you know what I mean? So I think sometimes the culture, which is now, I think since losing Ben, and I think having lost, you know, I think so many people, especially in the skateboarding community, suicide and mental health, I think there is definitely starting to be this shift. I think a large part of it is there's no routine, there's kind of no structure. And as humans, I know with me, I need routine. We all do. That kind of thing to get you up in the morning, get you going. And I know, even if I've had a few drinks and I'm hungover on a Sunday, I feel rubbish by like 9 p.m. because I've sat like an absolute sack of potatoes. But I think not having that structure, I think, can be really, really hard. No structure, that lifestyle that was kind of glorified, definitely, which is now, I think, there has been, I think, wouldn't you agree, Chris? I think there is a real shift. And like with our SMiLE films and with everything, everyone being so open and, being sober is becoming so praised and becoming really more well known in the skateboarding community. I've definitely noticed it talking to people, which is amazing, because that's something that I know Ben would say to, so he'd be like, I'm going to do it one day. So I definitely think that's a big part of it, I guess, structure and with the foundation, sorry, before you go, Chris, with the foundation, to get involved, like anybody, to get involved, I think just helping us create awareness is, kind of our main aim, to get people talking, talk to your friends, reaching out to your friends, with Rob, who runs one of the trustees of the charity, does all of our bits and bobs on the Instagram. So there's some amazing information on there, and we've just got a new website which has got all any kind of help you need from all around the world, all different support networks and numbers. So that's I guess the best way. We'll be doing more events and things, but at the minute it's a bit like this, it's kind of virtual still. So but yeah, would you kind of agree, Chris, on that I guess it's kind of, I guess, escaping what was, I think, years ago, that kind of drinking, partying, trip kind of things, pretty heavy in it, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely, with the structure, that's for me as well personally, that was something which really impacted me. Like, how long have I been like skateboarding as like a full-time job now? For just over 6 years. I used to work a normal, like a job, and then I'd skate, and then it got to the stage where I was able to live off it. But I definitely found in that period, not having like the kind of structure, it was really tough. Like if it was raining in the day, you wouldn't really, I'd find it hard to like find something to do. If you've not got a project on, you're kind of like a little bit lost. You're like, what am I, getting up and stuff? What's your it's like, it's easy to lack a purpose when you haven't got like a project you're working on. Yeah. There's also, beyond the structure side of things, I suppose there's other things that come into play, like injuries as well. These are things which are like definitely can impact on your mental health, not being able to skate, and like having, the kind of some sense of responsibility that you want to perform and film and work on or something, but you're unable to. So that restriction can be really difficult to work with, I think. And if if you're fortunate to be someone who's got like other hobbies outside of skateboarding, then you can kind of find other things to do with your time. But I don't know, if you haven't got that, then it's really tough. So I think, one side of things is like finding some balance as well, to work with that when those issues do arise. Another aspect of it as well, I guess, is like, it's a sport. So even though like, people aren't always like competitive within skateboarding, it's very easy to go into like a comparative mindset and to be like, I think like for me, I definitely had like a little bit of a sense of imposter syndrome as a skateboarder when I became, sponsored. And I remember chatting to Ben. Ben used to have like a really similar thing where he just wouldn't feel he was like very good. We'd go skate and he wouldn't skate. And I do the same thing occasionally. I'm like, I'm a bit shook. I feel a bit like I don't want to skate because I don't think I'm good enough. And these are things for me with the skateboard element, which like I've been trying to like push through. Kind of that ties in with what we were talking about, the negative automatic thoughts as well, like not thinking you're good enough, comparing yourself with others. You know, there's also like an imminent sense of danger within skateboarding. You can hurt yourself. So if you're feeling a bit anxious, like you kind of, that really affects your body as well. So for me personally, whenever I'm having periods of anxiety, I definitely find skateboarding's impacted. So my performance is impinged, and that can lead into a bit of a spiral in itself.
It's kind of like, and then it's like your purpose again, isn't it? It goes down to that thing of being like, you know, you're injured, and then your purpose, you know, what you feel goes back to having that no routine. And yeah, I think it's so true.
Yeah, definitely. So I think with these things, it's like, it's really important to stay mindful of this stuff as well. Like, as you know, as a skateboarder, I think, like you said, like there was this culture which was quite unhealthy, which is like, yeah, drinking, like going partying, you know, stuff. That's really cool, but it's like it's definitely like it's changed a lot, especially within like the London's, like within the scenes I'm in anyway. Definitely there isn't this like glorified, like, oh yeah man, cool, you drank loads. It's like, that's not really celebrated amongst my friends. It's more like if someone's at the party and they're drinking loads, you're like, well, why are they drinking? You're more concerned. It's like the other way. You're not like, that's the coolest guy at the party, let's hang out with him. It's like, oh, what's going on there? Like, maybe let's chat with them.
Yeah, exactly. That's I think the amazing thing is that I think seeing that difference and that change, and it not being a, you know, I think definitely when I think about Ben, sometimes when I'd be out with him socialising, he was that guy, Chris. He was that guy, and he'd be like, way down in a pint, and I'd be like, oh gosh, take you home.
That's amazing to hear though, Chris, that you as a group would notice a behaviour like that and be more concerned. That, like, it just shows the kind of the mind shift and the kind of the growth, I guess. Because also with boys as well, because I guess skateboarding is quite a male dominated kind of world as well. So anywhere where there's, you know, a lot of men, a lot of ego, I guess, like you were saying, competitiveness and comparison, it, you know, it has the potential to be that breeding ground for, like, you know, a toxic kind of aim around any vulnerability or about, like, you know, feeling bad and stuff like that. So
I think that really ties in with something which is really good about skateboarding at the moment. It's kind of like, as it's becoming more diverse, like skateboarding definitely like is becoming more diverse, and it is becoming a bit more anti-discriminatory as well. I think there's like less tolerance within the industry for behaviors that, you know, racist behaviors, sexist behaviors, you know, these things are like being challenged now, like fortunate, and they should be. And these are all things as well. And mental health is another thing that ties into that. As like we become more aware, and as skateboarding kind of becomes more open and is more diverse, it's like you have more people coming in that aren't just from this like male ego kind of sporty, like kind of, I don't know, there's different ideas coming in, and there's more openness. And I think it's only, you know, this skateboarding still got a journey to go, you know. It's like any aspect in society, but it's definitely kind of changing, and for the better, I definitely think.
I agree.
Why the foundation is so important, and it's already done so much like amazing work already, you know.
It's pretty overwhelming. So like, it's amazing, you know. And obviously it's Ben's anniversary, 2 years next Friday, so it's madness. I can't really believe it. It's been, you know, something so beautiful out of something so tragic. But
do you mind if I say a little bit on suicide? Would that be all right?
Absolutely not. Go for it.
So I think if there's someone in your group of friends where you're skating, someone you're hanging out with that you're worried about, please ask them openly, are they thinking about suicide? That is a great question to ask. It's a great leveler. It's a great way in. And by being non-judgmental about it, you're allowing them to talk about perhaps their deepest, darkest fear. Difficult question to ask. The first time, but I've never had a bad reaction to it. The reaction from asking that question has always been fantastic. So please if you're worried about someone, come from that place of care and love and concern. Be honest. I'm worried about you, mate. Or are you thinking about taking your own life by suicide? And see what they say. Just sit back with 2 ears and listen to what they're saying. And you may save their life. Let them open up. So if you are having those thoughts, those are really common. 20% of the population in the UK have had them. They are temporary, they do pass, and we don't have to act on them. There's been a massive change through the foundation on normalising this conversation. That's what we want to continue to do. So do ask your mates, do tell your mates if you're feeling like that. It can really make the difference, and you can move on, move past these thoughts. And so why not get involved with the foundation? I'm sure there's going to be links here to click on, get involved, see what you can bring to it. We'd love to have you involved and normalise this conversation more around mental health and suicide. Chris, you've done an amazing job making this film, putting yourself out there, so courageous and just so honest and open. Really respect you for that, and thank you so much. It's a brilliant film. I love it. Thanks very much for this evening.
Thank you for
just a huge thank you on behalf of Ben and all of us at the foundation. You know, I was like, woke up this morning and thought, oh my God, it's a week since it's been 2 years, but I couldn't have think of a better way to start this kind of run down the week with such an amazing, open and honest conversation. You're incredible. You're saving lives. Please keep being so open. Leilah, you are probably one of the most knowledgeable wizards I've ever come across when it comes to anxiety and dealing with it. And you've taught me so much, and you will have taught so many people so much with this. So thank you so much. And Andy, it's always such a pleasure, an absolute hero, fighting the mental health battle alongside us. So thank you so much. And yeah, thanks so much again, guys.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Everybody go well. Be your own best friend.
Yeah.